Purport. The whole incident is now cleared up. Maharaja Parikshit's garlanding the sage with a dead snake was not at all a very serious offense, but Sringi's cursing the king was a serious offense. The serious offense was committed by a foolish child only. Therefore he deserved to be pardoned by the Supreme Lord, although it was not possible to get free from the sinful reaction. Maharaja Parikshit also did not mind the curse offered to him by a foolish Brahmana. On the contrary, he took full advantage of the awkward situation, and by the great will of the Lord, Maharaja Parikshit achieved the highest perfection of life through the grace of Srila Sukadeva Goswami. Actually, it was the desire of the Lord and Maharaja Parikshit. Rishi Samika and his son Sringi were all instrumental in fulfilling the desire of the Lord. So none of them were put into difficulty because everything was done in relation with the Supreme Person. Text 50. Generally, the transcendentalists, even though engaged by others in the dualities of the material world, are not distressed, nor do they take pleasure in worldly things, for they are transcendentally engaged. Purport. The transcendentalists are the empiric philosophers, the mystics, and the devotees of the Lord. Empiric philosophers aim at the perfection of merging into the being of the Absolute. Mystics aim at perceiving the all-pervading Supersoul, and the devotees of the Lord are engaged in the transcendental loving service of the personality of Godhead. Since Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan are different phases of the same transcendence, all these transcendentalists are beyond the three modes of material nature. Material distresses and happinesses are products of the three modes, and therefore the causes of such material distress and happiness have nothing to do with the transcendentalists. The king was a devotee, and the rishi was a mystic. Therefore both of them were unattached to the accidental incident created by the supreme will. The playful child was an instrument in fulfilling the Lord's will. Thus end the Bhaktivedanta purports of the first canto, 18th chapter of the Srimad Bhagavatam, entitled Maharaja Parikshit Cursed by a Brahmana Boy. Chapter 19. The Appearance of Sukadeva Goswami. Text 1. Sri Sutta Goswami said, while returning home, the king, Maharaja Parikshit, felt that the act he had committed against the faultless and powerful Brahmana was heinous and uncivilized. Consequently, he was distressed. Purport. The pious king regretted his accidental improper treatment of the powerful Brahmana, who was faultless. Such repentance is natural for a good man like the king, and such repentance delivers a devotee from all kinds of sins accidentally committed. The devotees are naturally faultless. Accidental sins committed by a devotee are sincerely regretted, and by the grace of the Lord all sins unwillingly committed by a devotee are burnt in the fire of repentance. Text 2. King Parikshit thought, due to my neglecting the injunctions of the Supreme Lord, I must certainly expect some difficulty to overcome me in the near future. I now desire without reservation that the calamity come now, for in this way I may be freed of the sinful action and not commit such an offense again. Purport. The Supreme Lord enjoins that Brahmanas and cows must be given all protection. The Lord is himself very much inclined to do good to Brahmanas and cows. Go Brahmana hitaya cha. Maharaja Parikshit knew all this, and thus he concluded that his insulting a powerful Brahmana was certainly to be punished by the laws of the Lord, and he was expecting something very difficult in the very near future. He therefore desired the imminent calamity to fall on him and not on his family members. A man's personal misconduct affects all his family members. Therefore Maharaja Parikshit desired the calamity to fall on him alone. By suffering personally, he would be restrained from future sins, and at the same time the sin which he had committed would be counteracted so that his descendants would not suffer. That is the way a responsible devotee thinks. The family members of a devotee also share the effects of a devotee's service unto the Lord. Maharaja Prahlada saved his demon father by his personal devotional service. A devotee son in the family is the greatest boon or blessing of the Lord. Text 3. I am uncivilized and sinful due to my neglect of Brahminical culture, God consciousness, and cow protection. Therefore I wish that my kingdom, strength, and riches burn up immediately by the fire of the Brahmana's wrath, so that in the future I may not be guided by such inauspicious attitudes. Purport. Progressive human civilization is based on Brahminical culture, God consciousness, and protection of cows. All economic development of the state, by trade, commerce, agriculture, and industries, must be fully utilized in relation to the above principles. Otherwise, all so-called economic development becomes a source of degradation. Cow protection means feeding the Brahminical culture, which leads towards God consciousness, and thus perfection of human civilization is achieved. The age of Kali aims at killing the higher principles of life, and although Maharaja Parikshit strongly resisted the domination of the personality of Kali within the world, the influence of the age of Kali came at an opportune moment, and even a strong king like Maharaja Parikshit was induced to disregard the Brahminical culture due to a slight provocation of hunger and thirst. Maharaja Parikshit lamented the accidental incident, and he desired that all his kingdom's strength and accumulation of wealth would be burned up for not being engaged in Brahminical culture, etc. Where wealth and strength are not engaged in the advancement of Brahminical culture, God consciousness, and cow protection, the state and home are surely doomed by providence. If we want peace and prosperity in the world, we should take lessons from this verse. Every state and every home must endeavor to advance the cause of Brahminical culture for self-purification, God consciousness for self-realization, and cow protection for getting sufficient milk and the best food to continue a perfect civilization. Text 4. While the king was thus repenting, he received news of his imminent death, which would be due to the bite of a snake bird, occasioned by the curse spoken by the sage's son. The king accepted this as good news, for it would be the cause of his indifference toward worldly things. Purport. Real happiness is achieved by spiritual existence or by cessation of the repetition of birth and death. One can stop the repetition of birth and death only by going back to Godhead. In the material world, even by attaining the topmost planet, Brahmaloka, one cannot get rid of the conditions of repeated birth and death, but still we do not accept the path of attaining perfection. The path of perfection frees one from all material attachments, and thus one becomes fit to enter into the spiritual kingdom. Therefore, those who are materially poverty-stricken are better candidates than those who are materially prosperous. Maharaja Parikshit was a great devotee of the Lord and a bona fide candidate for entering into the kingdom of God. But even though he was so, his material assets as the emperor of the world were setbacks to perfect attainment of his rightful status as one of the associates of the Lord in the spiritual sky. As a devotee of the Lord, he could understand that the cursing of the Brahmana boy, although unwise, was a blessing upon him, being the cause of detachment from worldly affairs, both political and social. Samika Muni also, after regretting the incident, conveyed the news to the king as a matter of duty, so that the king would be able to prepare himself to go back to Godhead. Samika Muni sent news to the king that foolish Sringi, his son, although a powerful Brahmana boy, unfortunately had misused his spiritual power by cursing the king unwarrantedly. The incident of the king's garlanding the Muni was not sufficient cause for being cursed to death, but since there was no way to retract the curse, the king was informed to prepare for death within a week. Both Samika Muni and the king were self-realized souls. Samika Muni was a mystic, and Maharaja Parikshit was a devotee. Therefore there was no difference between them in self-realization. Neither of them was afraid of meeting death. Maharaja Parikshit would have gone to the Muni to beg his pardon, but the news of imminent death was conveyed to the king with so much regret by the Muni that the king did not want to shame the Muni further by his presence there. He decided to prepare himself for his imminent death and find out the way to go back to Godhead. The life of a human being is a chance to prepare oneself to go back to Godhead, or to get rid of the material existence, the repetition of birth and death. Thus, in the system of Varnashrama Dharma, every man and woman is trained for this purpose. In other words, the system of Varnashrama Dharma, known also as Sanatana Dharma, or the eternal occupation. The system of Varnashrama Dharma prepares a man for going back to Godhead, and thus a householder is ordered to go to the forest as a vanaprastha to acquire complete knowledge, and then to take sannyasa prior to his inevitable death. Parikshit Maharaja was fortunate to get a 7-day notice to meet his inevitable death, but for the common man there is no definite notice, although death is inevitable for all. Foolish men forget this sure fact of death and neglect the duty of preparing themselves for going back to Godhead. They spoil their lives in animal propensities to eat, drink, be merry, and enjoy. Such an irresponsible life is adopted by the people in the age of Kali because of a sinful desire to condemn Brahminical culture, God consciousness, and cow protection, for which the state is responsible. The state must employ revenue to advance these three items and thus educate the populace to prepare for death. The state which does so is the real welfare state. The state of India should better follow the examples of Maharaja Parikshit, the ideal executive head, than to imitate other materialistic states which have no idea of the kingdom of Godhead, the ultimate goal of human life. Deterioration of the ideals of Indian civilization has brought about the deterioration of civic life, not only in India but also abroad. Text 5. Maharaja Parikshit sat down firmly on the banks of the Ganges to concentrate his mind in Krishna consciousness, rejecting all other practices of self-realization, because transcendental loving service to Krishna is the greatest achievement, superseding all other methods. Purport. For a devotee like Maharaja Parikshit, none of the material planets, even the topmost Brahmaloka, is as desirable as Goloka Vrindavana, the abode of Lord Sri Krishna, the primeval Lord and original personality of Godhead. The earth is one of the innumerable material planets within the universe, and there are innumerable universes also within the compass of the Mahatattva. The devotees are told by the Lord and his representatives, the spiritual masters or acharyas, that not one of the planets within all the innumerable universes is suitable for the residential purposes of a devotee. The devotee always desires to go back home, back to Godhead, just to become one of the associates of the Lord in the capacity of servitor, friend, parent, or conjugal lover of the Lord, either in one of the innumerable Vaikuntha planets or in Goloka Vrindavana, the planet of Lord Sri Krishna. All these planets are eternally situated in the spiritual sky, the Paravyoma, which is on the other side of the causal ocean within the Mahatattva. Maharaja Parikshit was already aware of all this information due to his accumulated piety and birth in a high family of devotees, Vaishnavas, and thus he was not at all interested in the material planets. Modern scientists are very eager to reach the moon by material arrangements, but they cannot conceive of the highest planet of this universe. But a devotee like Maharaja Parikshit does not care a fig for the moon, or for that matter any of the material planets. So when he was assured of his death on a fixed date, he became more determined in the transcendental loving service of Lord Krishna by complete fasting on the bank of the transcendental river Yamuna, which flows down by the capital of Hastinapura in the Delhi state. Both the Ganges and the Yamuna are amartya, transcendental rivers, and the Yamuna is yet more sanctified for the following reasons. Text 6. The river Ganges, by which the king sat to fast, carries the most auspicious water, which is mixed with the dust of the lotus feet of the Lord and tulasi leaves. Therefore that water sanctifies the three worlds inside and outside, and even sanctifies Lord Shiva and other demigods. Consequently, everyone who is destined to die must take shelter of this river. Purport. Maharaja Parikshit, just after receiving the news of his death within 7 days, at once retired from family life and shifted himself to the sacred bank of the Yamuna River. Generally, it is said that the king took shelter on the bank of the Ganges, but according to Srila Jiva Goswami, the king took shelter on the bank of the Yamuna. Srila Jiva Goswami's statement appears to be more accurate because of the geographical situation. Maharaja Parikshit resided in his capital Hastinapura, situated near present Delhi, and the river Yamuna flows down past the city. Naturally, the king would take shelter of the river Yamuna because she was flowing past his palace door, and as far as sanctity is concerned, the river Yamuna is more directly connected with Lord Krishna than the Ganges. The Lord sanctified the river Yamuna from the beginning of his transcendental pastimes in the world, while his father Vasudeva was crossing the Yamuna with the baby Lord Krishna for a safe place at Goloka on the other bank of the river from Mathura, the Lord fell down in the river, and by the dust of his lotus feet the river at once became sanctified. It is especially mentioned herein that Maharaja Parikshit took shelter of that particular river, which is beautifully flowing, carrying the dust of the lotus feet of Lord Krishna mixed with tulasi leaves. Lord Krishna's lotus feet are always besmeared with the tulasi leaves, and thus as soon as his lotus feet contact the water of the Ganges and the Yamuna, the rivers become at once sanctified. The Lord, however, contacted the river Yamuna more than the Ganges. According to the Varaha Purana, as quoted by Srila Jiva Goswami, there is no difference between the water of the Ganges and the Yamuna, but when the water of the Ganges is sanctified 100 times, it is called the Yamuna. Similarly, it is said in the scriptures that 1,000 names of Vishnu are equal to one name of Rama, and 3 names of Lord Rama are equal to one name of Krishna. Text 7. Thus the king, the worthy descendant of the Pandavas, decided once and for all, and sat on the Ganges bank to fast until death, and give himself up to the lotus feet of Lord Krishna, who alone is able to award liberation. So, freeing himself from all kinds of associations and attachments, he accepted the vows of a sage. Purport. The water of the Ganges sanctifies all the 3 worlds, including the gods and the demigods, because it emanates from the lotus feet of the personality of Godhead Vishnu. Lord Krishna is the fountainhead of the principle of Vishnu Tattva, and therefore shelter of his lotus feet can deliver one from all sins, including an offense committed by a king unto a Brahmana. Maharaja Parikshit therefore decided to meditate upon the lotus feet of Lord Sri Krishna, who is Makunda, or the giver of liberations of all description. The banks of the Ganges or the Yamuna give one a chance to remember the Lord continuously. Maharaja Parikshit freed himself from all sorts of material association and meditated upon the lotus feet of Lord Krishna, and that is the way of liberation. To be free from all material association means to cease completely from committing any further sins. To meditate upon the lotus feet of the Lord means to become free from the effects of all previous sins. The conditions of the material world are so made that one has to commit sins willingly or unwillingly, and the best example is Maharaja Parikshit himself, who was a recognized sinless, pious king. But he also became a victim of an offense, even though he was ever unwilling to commit such a mistake. He was cursed also, but because he was a great devotee of the Lord, even such reverses of life became favorable. The principle is that one should not willingly commit any sin in his life, and should constantly remember the lotus feet of the Lord without deviation. Only in such a mood will the Lord help the devotee make regular progress toward the path of liberation, and thus attain the lotus feet of the Lord. Even if there are accidental sins committed by the devotee, the Lord saves the surrendered soul from all sins, as confirmed in all scriptures. Svapada mulam bhajata priyasya tyaktani abhavasya hari paresha vakarma yach chutpatitam kathanchid dunoti sharvam shridi sanishta. Bhagavad Gita 11.542. Text 8. At that time, all the great minds and thinkers, accompanied by their disciples and sages, who could verily sanctify a place of pilgrimage just by their presence, arrived there on the plea of making a pilgrim's journey. Purport. When Maharaja Parikshit sat down on the bank of the Ganges, the news spread in all directions of the universe, and the great-minded sages, who could follow the importance of the occasion, all arrived there on the plea of pilgrimage. Actually, they came to meet Maharaja Parikshit, and not to take a bath of pilgrimage, because all of them were competent enough to sanctify the places of pilgrimage. Common men go to pilgrimage sites to get themselves purified of all sins. Thus the places of pilgrimage become overburdened with the sins of others. But when such sages visit overburdened places of pilgrimage, they sanctify the places by their presence. Therefore the sages who came to meet Maharaja Parikshit were not very much interested in getting themselves purified like common men, but on the plea of taking a bath in that place they came to meet Maharaja Parikshit, because they could foresee that Srimad Bhagavatam would be spoken by Sukadeva Goswami. All of them wanted to take advantage of the great occasion. Text 9 through 10. From the different parts of the universe there arrived great sages like Atri, Chavana, Saradvan, Aristanemi, Bhrigu, Vashishta, Parashara, Vishvamitra, Angira, Parashurama, Uttatya, Indrapramada, Idmavadu, Medatiti, Devala, Arstisena, Bharadvaja, Gautama, Pipalada, Maitreya, Arva, Kavasa, Kumbhayani, Dvapayana, and the great personality Narada. Purport. Syavana, a great sage and one of the sons of Bhrigu Muni, he was born prematurely when his pregnant mother was kidnapped. Syavana is one of the 6 sons of his father. Bhrigu. When Brahmaji was performing a great sacrifice on behalf of Varuna, Maharshi Bhrigu was born from the sacrificial fire. He was a great sage, and his very dear wife was Puloma. He could travel in space like Durvasha, Narada, and others. He used to visit all the planets of the universe. Before the battle of Kurukshetra, he cried to stop the battle. Sometimes he instructed Bharadvaja Muni about astronomical evolution, and he is the author of the great Bhrigu Samhita, the great astrological calculation. He explained how air, fire, water, and earth are generated from ether. He explained how the air in the stomach works and regulates the intestines. As a great philosopher, he logically established the eternity of the living entity, Mahabharata. He was also a great anthropologist, and the theory of evolution was long ago explained by him. He was a scientific profounder of the 4 divisions and orders of human society, known as the Varnashrama institution. He converted the Kshatriya king Vitathavya into a Brahmana. Vashishta, see Srimad Bhagavatam 196. Parashara, he is the grandson of Vashishta Muni and father of Vyasadeva. He is the son of Maharshi Shakti, and his mother's name was Adrasyati. He was in the womb of his mother when she was only 12 years old, and from within the womb of his mother he learned the Vedas. His father was killed by a demon, Kalmasapada, and to avenge this, he wanted to annihilate the whole world. He was restrained, however, by his grandfather Vashishta. He then performed a Rakshasa killing yajna, but Maharishi Pulastya restrained him. He begot Vyasadeva, being attracted by Satyavati, who was to become the wife of Maharaja Santanu. By the blessings of Parashara, Satyavati became fragrant for miles. He was present also during the time of Bhisma's death. He was the spiritual master of Maharaja Janaka and a great devotee of Lord Shiva. He is the author of many Vedic scriptures and sociological directions. Gadisutta, or Vishvamitra, a great sage of austerity and mystic power. He is famous as Gadisutta because his father was Gadi, a powerful king of the province of Kanyakubja, part of Uttara Pradesh. Although he was a Kshatriya by birth, he became a Brahmana in the very same body by the power of his spiritual achievements. He picked a quarrel with Vashishta Muni when he was a Kshatriya king and performed a great sacrifice in cooperation with Maganga Muni, and thus was able to vanquish the sons of Vashishta. He became a great yogi, and yet he failed to check his senses, and thus was obliged to become the father of Sakuntala, the beauty queen of world history. Once, when he was a Kshatriya king, he visited the hermitage of Vashishta Muni, and he was given a royal reception. Vishvamitra wanted from Vashishta a cow named Nandini, and the Muni refused to deliver it. Vishvamitra stole the cow, and thus there was a quarrel between the sage and the king. Vishvamitra was defeated by the spiritual strength of Vashishta, and thus the king decided to become a Brahmana. Before becoming a Brahmana, he underwent severe austerity on the bank of the Kausika. He was also one who tried to stop the Kurukshetra war. Angira. He is one of the 6 mental sons of Brahma and the father of Brihaspati, the great learned priest of the demigods in the heavenly planets. He was born of the semen of Brahmaji, given to a cinder of fire. Uttatya and Samvarta are his sons. It is said that he is still performing austerity and chanting the holy name of the Lord at a place known as Alokananda on the banks of the Ganges. Parashurama. See Srimad Bhagavatam 196. Uttatya, one of the 3 sons of Maharshi Angira, he was the spiritual master of Maharaja Mandata. He married Bhadra, the daughter of Soma, moon. Varuna kidnapped his wife Bhadra, and to retaliate the offense of the god of water, he drank all the water of the world. Medatiti, an old sage of yore, an assembly member of the heavenly king Indradeva. His son was Kanva Muni, who brought up Shakuntala in the forest. He was promoted to the heavenly planet by strictly following the principles of retired life, Vanaprashta. Devala, a great authority like Narada Muni and Vyasadeva, his good name is on the list of authorities mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita when Arjuna acknowledged Lord Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He met Maharaja Yudhishthira after the Battle of Kurukshetra, and he was the elder brother of Damya, the priest of the Pandava family. Like the Kshatriyas, he also allowed his daughter to select her own husband in a Svayamvara meeting, and at that ceremony all the bachelor sons of the rishis were invited. According to some, he is not Asita Devala. Bharadvaja, see Srimad Bhagavatam 196. Gautama, one of the 7 great sages of the universe, Shraddhavan Gautama was one of his sons. Persons of the Gautama Gotra dynasty today are either his family descendants or in his disciplic succession. The Brahmanas who profess Gautama Gotra are generally family descendants, and the Kshatriyas and Vaishyas who profess Gautama Gotra are all in the line of his disciplic succession. He was the husband of the famous Ahalya, who turned into stone when Indradeva, the king of heaven, molested her. Ahalya was delivered by Lord Ramachandra. Gautama was the grandfather of Kirpacharya, one of the heroes of the Battle of Kurukshetra. Maitreya, a great rishi of yore, he was the spiritual master of Vidura and a great religious authority. He advised Dhritarashtra to keep good relations with the Pandavas. Duryodhana disagreed and thus was cursed by him. He met Vyasadeva and had religious discourses with him. Text 11. There were also many other saintly demigods, kings, and special royal orders called Arunadayas, a special rank of Rajarshis, from different dynasties of sages. When they all assembled together to meet the emperor Parikshit, he received them properly and bowed his head to the ground. Purport. The system of bowing the head to the ground to show respect to superiors is an excellent etiquette which obliges the honored guest deep into the heart. Even the first great offender is excused simply by this process, and Maharaja Parikshit, although honored by all the rishis and kings, welcomed all the big men in that humble etiquette in order to be excused from any offenses. Generally, at the last stage of one's life, this humble method is adopted by every sensible man, in order to be excused before departure. In this way, Maharaja Parikshit implored everyone's goodwill for going back home, back to Godhead. Text 12. After all the rishis and others had seated themselves comfortably, the king, humbly standing before them with folded hands, told them of his decision to fast until death. Purport. Although the king had already decided to fast until death on the bank of the Ganges, he humbly expressed his decision to elicit the opinions of the great authorities present there. Any decision, however important, should be confirmed by some authority. That makes the matter perfect. This means that the monarchs who ruled the earth in those days were not irresponsible dictators. They scrupulously followed the authoritative decisions of the saints and sages in terms of Vedic injunction. Maharaja Parikshit, as a perfect king, followed the principles by consulting the authorities, even up to the last days of his life. Text 13. The fortunate king said, "Indeed, we are the most grateful of all the kings who are trained to get favors from the great souls. Generally, you sages consider royalty as refuse to be rejected and left in a distant place." Purport. According to religious principles, stool, urine, washwater, etc. must be left at a long distance. Attached bathrooms, urinals, etc. may be very convenient amenities of modern civilization, but they are ordered to be situated at a distance from residential quarters. That very example is cited herein in relation to the kingly order for those who are progressively marching back to Godhead. Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said that to be in intimate touch with dollars and cents against men, or the kingly order, is worse than suicide for one who desires to go back to Godhead. In other words, the transcendentalists do not generally associate with men who are too enamored by the external beauty of God's creation. By advanced knowledge in spiritual realization, the transcendentalist knows that this beautiful material world is nothing but a shadowy reflection of the reality, the kingdom of God. They are not, therefore, very much captivated by royal opulence or anything like that. But in the case of Maharaja Parikshit, the situation was different. Apparently, the king was condemned to death by an inexperienced Brahmana boy, but factually he was called by the Lord to return to him. Other transcendentalists, the great sages and mystics who assembled together because of Maharaja Parikshit's fasting unto death, were quite anxious to see him, for he was going back to Godhead. Maharaja Parikshit also could understand that the great sages who assembled there were all kind to his forefathers, the Pandavas, because of their devotional service to the Lord. He therefore felt grateful to the sages for being present there at the last stage of his life, and he felt that it was all due to the gratefulness of his late forefathers or grandfathers. He felt proud, therefore, that he happened to be the descendant of such great devotees. Such pride for the devotees of the Lord is certainly not equal to the puffed-up sense of vanity for material prosperity. The first is reality, whereas the other is false and vain. Text 14. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, the controller of both the transcendental and mundane worlds, has graciously overtaken me in the form of a Brahmana's curse, due to my being too much attached to family life. The Lord, in order to save me, has appeared before me in such a way that only out of fear I will detach myself from the world. Purport. Maharaja Parikshit, although born in a family of great devotees, the Pandavas, and although sincerely trained in transcendental attachment for the association of the Lord, still found the allurement of mundane family life so strong that he had to be detached by a plan of the Lord. Such direct action is taken by the Lord in the case of a special devotee. Maharaja Parikshit could understand this by the presence of the topmost transcendentalists in the universe. The Lord resides with his devotees, and therefore the presence of the great saints indicated the presence of the Lord. The king therefore welcomed the presence of the great rishis as a mark of favor of the Supreme Lord. Text 15. O Brahmanas, just accept me as a completely surrendered soul, and let Mother Ganges, the representative of the Lord, also accept me in that way, for I have already taken the lotus feet of the Lord into my heart. Let the snake bird, or whatever magical thing the Brahmana created, bite me at once. I only desire that you all continue singing the deeds of Lord Vishnu. Purport. As soon as one is given up completely unto the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord, he is not at all afraid of death. The atmosphere created by the presence of great devotees of the Lord on the bank of the Ganges and Maharaja Parikshit's complete acceptance of the Lord's lotus feet were sufficient guarantee to the king for going back to Godhead. He thus became absolutely free from all fear of death. Text 16. Again, offering obeisances unto all you Brahmanas, I pray that if I should again take my birth in the material world, I will have complete attachment to the unlimited Lord Krishna, association with his devotees, and friendly relations with all living beings. Purport. That a devotee of the Lord is the only perfect living being is explained herein by Maharaja Parikshit. A devotee of the Lord is no one's enemy, although there may be many enemies of a devotee. A devotee of the Lord does not like to associate with non-devotees, although he has no enmity with them. He desires association with the devotees of the Lord. This is perfectly natural, because birds of the same feather mix together, and the most important function of a devotee is to have complete attachment for Lord Sri Krishna, the Father of all living beings. As a good son of the Father behaves in a friendly way with all his other brothers, so also the devotee of the Lord, being a good son of the Supreme Father, Lord Krishna, sees all other living beings in relation with the Supreme Father. He tries to bring back the upstart sons of the Father to a saner stage, and to get them to accept the Supreme Fatherhood of God. Maharaja Parikshit was certainly going back to Godhead, but even if he were not to go back, he prayed for a pattern of life which is the most most perfect way in the material world. A pure devotee does not desire the company of a personality as great as Brahma, but he prefers the association of a petty living being, provided he is a devotee of the Lord. Text 17. In perfect self-control, Maharaja Parikshit sat down on a seat of straw, with straw roots facing the east, placed on the southern bank of the Ganges, and he himself faced the north. Just previously he had given charge of his kingdom over to his son. Purport. The river Ganges is celebrated as the wife of the sea. The seat of kusha straw is considered to be sanctified if the straw is taken out of the earth complete with root, and if the root is pointed toward the east, it is considered to be auspicious. Facing the north is still more favorable for attaining spiritual success. Maharaja Parikshit handed over the charge of administration to his son before leaving home. He was thus fully equipped for all favorable conditions. Text 18. Thus the king, Maharaja Parikshit, sat to fast until death. All the demigods of the higher planets praised the king's actions, and in pleasure continually scattered flowers over the earth and beat celestial drums. Purport. Even up to the time of Maharaja Parikshit, there were interplanetary communications, and the news of Maharaja Parikshit's fasting unto death to attain salvation reached the higher planets in the sky where the intelligent demigods live. The demigods are more luxurious than human beings, but all of them are obedient to the orders of the Supreme Lord. There is no one in the heavenly planets who is an atheist or non-believer. Thus any devotee of the Lord on the surface of the earth is always praised by them, and in the case of Maharaja Parikshit, they were greatly delighted, and thus gave tokens of honor by scattering flowers over the earth, and by beating celestial drums. A demigod takes pleasure in seeing someone go back to Godhead. He is always pleased with the devotee of the Lord, so much so that by his adidaivic powers he may help the devotees in all respects, and by their actions the Lord is pleased with them. There is an invisible chain of complete cooperation between the Lord, the demigods, and the devotee of the Lord on earth. Text 19. All the great sages who were assembled there also praised the decision of Maharaja Parikshit, and they expressed their approval by saying, "Very good." Naturally, the sages are inclined to do good to common men, for they have all the qualitative powers of the Supreme Lord. Therefore, they were very much pleased to see Maharaja Parikshit, a devotee of the Lord, and they spoke as follows. Purport. The natural beauty of a living being is enhanced by his rising up to the platform of devotional service. Maharaja Parikshit was absorbed in attachment for Lord Krishna. Seeing this, the great sages assembled were very pleased, and they expressed their approval by saying, "Very good." Such sages are naturally inclined to do good to the common man, and when they see a personality like Maharaja Parikshit advance in devotional service, their pleasure knows no bounds, and they offer all blessings in their power. The devotional service of the Lord is so auspicious that all demigods and sages, up to the Lord himself, become pleased with the devotee, and therefore the devotee finds everything auspicious. All inauspicious matters are removed from the path of a progressive devotee. Meeting all the great sages at the time of death was certainly auspicious for Maharaja Parikshit, and thus he was blessed by the so-called curse of a Brahmana's boy. Text 20. The sages said, "O chief of all the saintly kings of the Pandu dynasty, who are strictly in the line of Lord Sri Krishna, it is not at all astonishing that you give up your throne, which is decorated with the helmets of many kings, to achieve eternal association with the personality of Godhead." Purport. Foolish politicians who hold political administrative posts think that the temporary posts they occupy are the highest material gain of life, and therefore they stick to those posts even up to the last moment of life, without knowing that achievement of liberation as one of the associates of the Lord in his eternal abode is the highest gain of life. The human life is meant for achieving this end. The Lord has assured us in the Bhagavad Gita many times that going back to Godhead, his eternal abode, is the highest achievement. Prahlada Maharaja, while praying to Lord Narasimha, said, "O my Lord, I am very much afraid of the materialistic way of life, and I am not the least afraid of your present ghastly ferocious feature as Narasimha Deva." This materialistic way of life is something like a grinding stone, and we are being crushed by it. We have fallen into this horrible whirlpool of the tossing waves of life, and thus, my Lord, I pray at your lotus feet to call me back to your eternal abode as one of your servitors. This is the summit liberation of this materialistic way of life. I have very bitter experience of the materialistic way of life. In whichever species of life I have taken birth, compelled by the force of my own activities, I have very painfully experienced two things, namely, separation from my beloved and meeting with what is not wanted. And to counteract them, the remedies which I undertook were more dangerous than the disease itself. So I drift from one point to another, birth after birth, and I pray to you, therefore, to give me a shelter at your lotus feet. The Pandava kings, who are more than many saints of the world, knew the bitter results of the materialistic way of life. They were never captivated by the glare of the imperial throne they occupied, and they sought always the opportunity of being called by the Lord to associate with him eternally. Maharaja Parikshit was the worthy grandson of Maharaja Yudhishthira. Maharaja Yudhishthira gave up the imperial throne to his grandson, and similarly Maharaja Parikshit, the grandson of Maharaja Yudhishthira, gave up the imperial throne to his son Janamejaya. That is the way of all the kings in the dynasty, because they are all strictly in the line of Lord Krishna. Thus the devotees of the Lord are never enchanted by the glare of materialistic life, and they live impartially, unattached to the objects of the false, illusory, materialistic way of life. Text 21. We shall all wait here until the foremost devotee of the Lord, Maharaja Parikshit, returns to the supreme planet, which is completely free from all mundane contamination and all kinds of lamentation. Purport. Beyond the limitation of the material creation, which is compared to the cloud in the sky, there is the Paravyoma, or the spiritual sky, full of planets called Vaikunthas. Such Vaikuntha planets are also differently known as the Purushottama Loka, Achyuta Loka, Trivikrama Loka, Hrishikesha Loka, Keshava Loka, Aniruddha Loka, Madhava Loka, Pradyumna Loka, Shankarshana Loka, Sridhara Loka, Vasudeva Loka, Ayodhya Loka, Dwarka Loka, and many other millions of spiritual lokas, wherein the personality of Godhead predominates. All the living entities there are liberated souls with spiritual bodies as good as that of the Lord. There is no material contamination. Everything there is spiritual, and therefore there is nothing objectively lamentable. They are full of transcendental bliss, and are without birth, death, old age, and disease. And amongst all the above-mentioned Vaikuntha Lokas, there is one supreme Loka called Goloka Vrindavana, which is the abode of the Lord Sri Krishna and his specific associates. Maharaja Parikshit was destined to achieve this particular Loka, and the great rishis assembled there could foresee this. All of them consulted among themselves about the great departure of the great king, and they wanted to see him up to the last moment, because they would no more be able to see such a great devotee of the Lord. When a great devotee of the Lord passes away, there is nothing to be lamented, because the devotee is destined to enter into the kingdom of God. But the sorry plight is that such great devotees leave our sight, and therefore there is every reason to be sorry. As the Lord is rarely to be seen by our present eyes, so also are the great devotees. The great rishis, therefore, correctly decided to remain on the spot till the last moment. Text 22. All that was spoken by the great sages was very sweet to hear, full of meaning, and appropriately presented as perfectly true. So after hearing them, Maharaja Parikshit, desiring to hear of the activities of Lord Sri Krishna, the personality of Godhead, congratulated the great sages. Text 23. The king said, O great sages, you have all very kindly assembled here, having come from all parts of the universe. You are all as good as supreme knowledge personified, who resides in the planet above the three worlds, Satyaloka. Consequently, you are naturally inclined to do good to others, and but for this you have no interest either in this life or in the next. Purport. 6 kinds of opulences, namely wealth, strength, fame, beauty, knowledge, and renunciation are all originally the different attributes pertaining to the absolute personality of Godhead. The living beings, who are part and parcel entities of the Supreme Being, have all these attributes partially, up to the full strength of 78%. In the material world, these attributes, up to 78% of the Lord's attributes, are covered by the material energy, as the sun is covered by a cloud. The covered strength of the sun is very dim compared to the original glare, and similarly, the original color of the living beings with such attributes becomes almost extinct. There are three planetary systems, namely the lower worlds, the intermediate worlds, and the upper worlds. The human beings on Earth are situated at the beginning of the intermediate worlds, but living beings like Brahma and his contemporaries live in the upper worlds, of which the topmost is Satyaloka. In Satyaloka, the inhabitants are fully cognizant of Vedic wisdom, and thus the mystic cloud of material energy is cleared. Therefore they are known as the Vedas personified. Such persons, being fully aware of knowledge, both mundane and transcendental, have no interest in either the mundane or transcendental worlds. They are practically desireless devotees. In the mundane world, they have nothing to achieve, and in the transcendental world, they are full in themselves. Then why do they come to the mundane world? They descend to different planets as messiahs by the order of the Lord to deliver the fallen souls. On the earth, they come down and do good to the people of the world in different circumstances, under different climatic influences. They have nothing to do in this world save and except reclaim the fallen souls rotting in material existence, deluded by material energy. Text 24. O trustworthy Brahmanas, I now ask you about my immediate duty. Please, after proper deliberation, tell me of the unalloyed duty of everyone in all circumstances, and specifically of those who are just about to die. Purport. In this verse, the king has placed two questions before the learned sages. The first question is, what is the duty of everyone in all circumstances? And the second question is, what is the specific duty of one who is to die very shortly? Out of the two, the question relating to the dying man is most important, because everyone is a dying man, either very shortly or after 100 years. The duration of life is immaterial, but the duty of a dying man is very important. Maharaja Parikshit placed these two questions before Sukadeva Goswami also on his arrival, and practically the whole of the Srimad Bhagavatam, beginning from the second canto up till the last, the 12th canto, deals with these two questions. The conclusion arrived at thereof is that devotional service of the Lord Sri Krishna, as it is confirmed by the Lord himself in the last phases of the Bhagavad Gita, is the last word in relation to everyone's permanent duty in life. Maharaja Parikshit was already aware of this fact, but he wanted the great sages assembled there to unanimously give their verdict on his conviction, so that he might be able to go on with his confirmed duty without controversy. He has especially mentioned the word Suddha, or perfectly correct. For transcendent realization of self-realization, many processes are recommended by various classes of philosophers. Some of them are first-class methods, and some of them are second- or third-class methods. The first-class method demands that one give up all other methods and surrender unto the lotus feet of the Lord, and thus be saved from all sins and their reactions. Text 25. At that moment there appeared the powerful son of Vyasadeva, who traveled over the earth disinterested and satisfied with himself. He did not manifest any symptoms of belonging to any social order or status of life. He was surrounded with women and children, and he dressed as if others had neglected him. Purport. The word Bhagavan is sometimes used in relation with some of the great devotees of the Lord, like Sukadeva Goswami. Such liberated souls are disinterested in the affairs of this material world because they are self-satisfied by the great achievements of devotional service. As explained before, Sukadeva Goswami never accepted any formal spiritual master, nor did he undergo any formal reformatory performances. His father, Vyasadeva, was his natural spiritual master, because Sukadeva Goswami heard Srimad Bhagavatam from him. After this, he became completely self-satisfied. Thus, he was not dependent on any formal process. The formal processes are necessary for those who are expected to reach the stage of complete liberation. But Sri Sukadeva Goswami was already in that status by the grace of his father. As a young boy, he was expected to be properly dressed, but he went about naked and was uninterested in social customs. He was neglected by the general populace, and inquisitive boys and women surrounded him as if he were a madman. He thus appears on the scene while traveling on the earth of his own accord. It appears that upon the inquiry of Maharaja Parikshit, the great sages were not unanimous in their decision as to what was to be done. For spiritual salvation, there were many prescriptions according to the different modes of different persons, but the ultimate aim of life is to attain the highest perfectional stage of devotional service to the Lord. As doctors differ, so also sages differ in their different prescriptions. While such things were going on, the great and powerful son of Vyasadeva appeared on the scene. Text 26. This son of Vyasadeva was only 16 years old. His legs, hands, thighs, arms, shoulders, forehead, and the other parts of his body were all delicately formed. His eyes were beautifully wide, and his nose and ears were highly raised. He had a very attractive face, and his neck was well formed and beautiful like a conch shell. Purport. A respectable personality is described beginning with the legs, and this honored system is observed here with Sukadeva Goswami. He was only 16 years of age. A person is honored for his achievements and not for advanced age. A person can be older by experience and not by age. Sri Sukadeva Goswami, who is described herein as the son of Vyasadeva, was by his knowledge more experienced than all the sages present there, although he was only 16 years old. Text 27. His collarbone was fleshy, his chest broad and thick, his navel deep, and his abdomen beautifully striped. His arms were long, and curly hair was strewn over his beautiful face. He was naked, and the hue of his body reflected that of Lord Krishna. Purport. His bodily features indicate him to be different from common men. All the signs described in connection with the bodily features of Sukadeva Goswami are uncommon symptoms, typical of great personalities, according to physiognomical calculations. His bodily hue resembled that of Lord Krishna, who is the supreme among the gods, demigods, and all living beings. Text 28. He was blackish and very beautiful due to his youth. Because of the glamour of his body and his attractive smiles, he was pleasing to women, though he tried to cover his natural glories. The great sages present there were all expert in the art of physiognomy, and so they honored him by rising from their seats. Text 29. Maharaja Parikshit, who is also known as Vishnurata, one who is always protected by Vishnu, bowed his head to receive the chief guest, Sukadeva Goswami. At that time, all the ignorant women and boys ceased following Srila Sukadeva. Receiving respect from all, Sukadeva Goswami took his exalted seat. Purport. On Sukadeva Goswami's arrival at the meeting, everyone, except Srila Vyasadeva, Narada, and a few others, stood up, and Maharaja Parikshit, who was glad to receive a great devotee of the Lord, bowed down before him with all the limbs of his body. Sukadeva Goswami also exchanged the greetings and reception by embrace, shaking of hands, nodding, and bowing down, especially before his father and Narada Muni. Thus he was offered the presidential seat at the meeting. When he was so received by the king and sages, the street boys and less intelligent women who followed him were struck with wonder and fear, so they retired from their frivolous activities, and everything was full of gravity and calm. Text 30. Sukadeva Goswami was then surrounded by saintly sages and demigods, just as the moon is surrounded by stars, planets, and other heavenly bodies. His presence was gorgeous, and he was respected by all. Purport. In the great assembly of saintly personalities, there was Vyasadeva, the Brahmarshi, Narada, the Devarshi, Parashurama, the great ruler of the Kshatriya kings, etc. Some of them were powerful incarnations of the Lord. Sukadeva Goswami was not known as Brahmarishi, Rajarishi, or Devarishi, nor was he an incarnation like Narada, Vyasa, or Parasurama, and yet he excelled them in respects paid. This means that the devotee of the Lord is more honored in the world than the Lord himself. One should therefore never minimize the importance of a devotee like Sukadeva Goswami. Text 31. The sage Sri Sukadeva Goswami sat perfectly pacified, intelligent, and ready to answer any question without hesitation. The great devotee, Maharaja Parikshit, approached him, offered his respects by bowing before him, and politely inquired with sweet words and folded hands. Purport. The gesture now adopted by Maharaja Parikshit of questioning a master is quite befitting in terms of scriptural injunctions. The scriptural injunction that one should humbly approach a spiritual master to understand the transcendental science. Maharaja Parikshit was now prepared for meeting his death, and with the very short time of 7 days he was to know the process of entering the kingdom of God. In such important cases, one is required to approach a spiritual master. There is no necessity of approaching a spiritual master unless one is in need of solving the problems of life. One who does not know how to put questions before the spiritual master has no business seeing him, and the qualification of the spiritual master is perfectly manifested in the person of Sukadeva Goswami. Both the spiritual master and the disciple, namely Sri Sukadeva Goswami and Maharaja Parikshit, attain perfection through the medium of Srimad Bhagavatam. Sukadeva Goswami learned Srimad Bhagavatam from his father Vyasadeva, but he had no chance to recite it. Before Maharaja Parikshit, he recited Srimad Bhagavatam and answered the questions of Maharaja Parikshit unhesitatingly, and thus both the master and the disciple got salvation. Text 32. The fortunate King Parikshit said, O Brahmana, by your mercy, only you have sanctified us, making us like unto places of pilgrimage, all by your presence here as my guest. By your mercy, we who are but unworthy royalty become eligible to serve the devotee. Purport. Saintly devotees like Sukadeva Goswami generally do not approach worldly enjoyers, especially those in royal orders. Maharaja Prataparudra was a follower of Lord Chaitanya, but when he wanted to see the Lord refused to see him because he was a king. For a devotee who desires to go back to Godhead, 2 things are strictly prohibited: worldly enjoyers and women. Therefore, devotees of the standard of Sukadeva Goswami are never interested in seeing kings. Maharaja Parikshit was, of course, a different case. He was a great devotee, although a king, and therefore Sukadeva Goswami came to see him in his last stage of life. Maharaja Parikshit, out of his devotional humility, felt himself an unworthy descendant of his great Kshatriya forefathers, although he was as great as his predecessors. The unworthy sons of the royal orders are called Kshatrabandhavas, as the unworthy sons of the Brahmanas are called Jivabandhus or Brahmabandhus. Maharaja Parikshit was greatly encouraged by the presence of Sukadeva Goswami. He felt himself sanctified by the presence of the great saint, whose presence turns any place into a place of pilgrimage. Text 33. Simply by our remembering you, our houses become instantly sanctified, and what to speak of seeing you, touching you, washing your holy feet, and offering you a seat in our home. Purport. The importance of holy places of pilgrimage is due to the presence of great sages and saints. It is said that sinful persons go to the holy places and leave their sins there to accumulate, but the presence of the great saints disinfects the accumulated sins, and thus the holy places continue to remain sanctified by the grace of the devotees and saints present there. If such saints appear in the homes of worldly people, certainly the accumulated sins of such worldly enjoyers become neutralized. Therefore the holy saints actually have no self-interest with the householders. The only aim of such saints is to sanctify the houses of the householders, and the householders therefore should feel grateful when such saints and sages appear at their doors. A householder who dishonors such holy orders is a great offender. It is enjoined, therefore, that a householder who does not bow down before a saint at once must undergo fasting for the day in order to neutralize the great offense. Text 34. Just as the atheist cannot remain in the presence of the personality of Godhead, so also the invulnerable sins of a man are immediately vanquished in your presence, O saint, O great mystic. Purport. There are 2 classes of human beings, namely the atheist and the devotee of the Lord. The devotee of the Lord, because of manifesting godly qualities, is called a demigod, whereas the atheist is called a demon. The demon cannot stand the presence of Vishnu, the personality of Godhead. The demons are always busy in trying to vanquish the personality of Godhead, but factually, as soon as the personality of Godhead appears, by either his transcendental name, form, attributes, pastimes, paraphernalia, or variegatedness, the demon is at once vanquished. It is said that a ghost cannot remain as soon as the holy name of the Lord is chanted. The great saints and devotees of the Lord are in the list of his paraphernalia, and thus as soon as a saintly devotee is present, the ghostly sins are at once vanquished. That is the verdict of all Vedic literatures. One is recommended, therefore, to associate only with saintly devotees, so that worldly demons and ghosts cannot exert their sinister influence. Text 35. Lord Krishna, the personality of Godhead, who is very dear to the sons of King Pandu, has accepted me as one of those relatives just to please his great cousins and brothers. Purport. A pure and exclusive devotee of the Lord serves his family interest more dexterously than others who are attached to illusory family affairs. Generally, people are attached to family matters, and the whole economic impetus of human society is moving under the influence of family affection. Such deluded persons have no information that one can render better service to the family by becoming a devotee of the Lord. The Lord gives special protection to the family members and descendants of a devotee, even though such members are themselves non-devotees. Maharaja Prahlada was a great devotee of the Lord, but his father, Hiranyakasipu, was a great atheist and declared enemy of the Lord. But despite all this, Hiranyakasipu was awarded salvation due to his being the father of Maharaja Prahlada. The Lord is so kind that he gives all protection to the family members of his devotee, and thus the devotee has no need to bother about his family members, even if one leaves such family members aside to discharge devotional service. Maharaja Yudhishthira and his brothers were the sons of Kunti, the paternal aunt of Lord Krishna, and Maharaja Parikshit admits the patronage of Lord Krishna because of his being the only grandson of the great Pandavas. Text 36. Otherwise, without being inspired by Lord Krishna, how is it that you have voluntarily appeared here, though you are moving incognito to the common man, and are not visible to us who are on the verge of death? Purport. The great sage Sukadeva Goswami was certainly inspired by Lord Krishna to appear voluntarily before Maharaja Parikshit, the great devotee of the Lord, just to give him the teachings of Srimad Bhagavatam. One can achieve the nucleus of the devotional service of the Lord by the mercy of the spiritual master and the personality of Godhead. The spiritual master is the manifested representative of the Lord to help one achieve ultimate success. One who is not authorized by the Lord cannot become a spiritual master. Srila Sukadeva Goswami is an authorized spiritual master, and thus he was inspired by the Lord to appear before Maharaja Parikshit and instruct him in the teachings of Srimad Bhagavatam. One can achieve the ultimate success of going back to Godhead if he is favored by the Lord sending his true representative. As soon as a true representative of the Lord is met by a devotee of the Lord, the devotee is assured a guarantee for going back to Godhead just after leaving the present body. This, however, depends on the sincerity of the devotee himself. The Lord is seated in the heart of all living beings, and thus he knows very well the movements of all individual persons. As soon as the Lord finds that a particular soul is very eager to go back to Godhead, the Lord at once sends his bona fide representative. The sincere devotee is thus assured by the Lord of going back to Godhead. The conclusion is that to get the assistance and help of a bona fide spiritual master means to receive the direct help of the Lord himself. Text 37. You are the spiritual master of great saints and devotees. I am therefore begging you to show the way of perfection for all persons, and especially for one who is about to die. Purport. Unless one is perfectly anxious to inquire about the way of perfection, there is no necessity of approaching a spiritual master. A spiritual master is not a kind of decoration for a householder. Generally, a fashionable materialist engages a so-called spiritual master without any profit. The pseudo-spiritual master flatters the so-called disciple, and thereby both the master and his ward go to hell without a doubt. Maharaja Parikshit is the right type of disciple because he puts forward questions vital to the interest of all men, particularly for the dying men. The question put forward by Maharaja Parikshit is the basic principle of the complete thesis of Srimad Bhagavatam. Now let us see how intelligently the great master replies. Text 38. Please let me know what a man should hear, chant, remember, and worship, and also what he should not do. Please explain all this to me. Text 39. O powerful Brahmana, it is said that you hardly stay in the houses of men long enough to milk a cow. Purport. Saints and sages in the renounced order of life go to the houses of the householders at the time they milk the cows, early in the morning, and ask some quantity of milk for subsistence. A pound of milk fresh from the milk bag of a cow is sufficient to feed an adult with all vitamin values, and therefore saints and sages live only on milk. Even the poorest of the householders keep at least 10 cows, each delivering 12 to 20 quarts of milk, and therefore no one hesitates to spare a few pounds of milk for the mendicants. It is the duty of householders to maintain the saints and sages, like the children. So a saint like Sukadeva Goswami would hardly stay at the house of a householder for more than 5 minutes in the morning. In other words, such saints are very rarely seen in the houses of householders, and Maharaja Parikshit therefore prayed to him to instruct him as soon as possible. The householders also should be intelligent enough to get some transcendental information from visiting sages. The householder should not foolishly ask a saint to deliver what is available in the market. That should be the reciprocal relation between the saints and the householders. Text 40. Sri Suta Goswami said, "The king thus spoke and questioned the sage, using sweet language. Then the great and powerful personality, the son of Yasadeva, who knew the principles of religion, began his reply." Thus end the Bhaktivedanta Purports of the first canto, 19th chapter of the Srimad Bhagavatam, entitled The Appearance of Sukadeva Goswami. End of the first canto. About the author. His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada appeared in this world in 1896 in Calcutta, India. He first met his spiritual master, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami, in Calcutta in 1922. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, a prominent religious scholar and the founder of 64 Gaudiya Matas, Vedic institutes in India, liked this educated young man and convinced him to dedicate his life to teaching Vedic knowledge. Srila Prabhupada became his student, and in 1933 his formally initiated disciple. At their first meeting, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati requested Srila Prabhupada to broadcast Vedic knowledge in English. In the years that followed, Srila Prabhupada wrote a commentary on the Bhagavad Gita, assisted the Gaudiya Mata in its work, and in 1944 started Back to Godhead, an English fortnightly magazine. Single-handedly, Srila Prabhupada edited it, typed the manuscripts, checked the galley proofs, and even distributed the individual copies. The magazine is now being continued by his disciples all over the world. In 1950, Srila Prabhupada retired from married life, adopting the Vanaprastha, retired order, to devote more time to his studies and writing. He traveled to the holy city of Vrindavana, where he lived in humble circumstances in the historic temple of Radha Damodara. There he engaged for several years in deep study and writing. He accepted the renounced order of life, sannyasa, in 1959. At Radha Damodara, Srila Prabhupada began work on his life's masterpiece, a multi-volume commentated translation of the 18,000-verse Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavata Purana. He also wrote Easy Journey to Other Planets. After publishing 3 volumes of the Bhagavatam, Srila Prabhupada came to the United States in September 1965 to fulfill the mission of his spiritual master. Subsequently, His Divine Grace wrote more than 60 volumes of authoritative commentated translations and summary studies of the philosophical and religious classics of India. When he first arrived by freighter in New York City, Srila Prabhupada was practically penniless. It was after almost a year of great difficulty that he established the International Society for Krishna Consciousness in July of 1966. Before he passed away on November 14, 1977, He had guided the society and seen it grow to a worldwide confederation of more than 100 ashrams, schools, temples, institutes, and farm communities. In 1972, His Divine Grace introduced the Vedic system of primary and secondary education in the West by founding the Gurukula School in Dallas, Texas. Since then, his disciples have established similar schools throughout the United States and the rest of the world. Srila Prabhupada also inspired the construction of several large international cultural centers in India. The center at Sridhama Mayapur is the site for a planned spiritual city, an ambitious project for which construction will extend over many years to come. In Vrindavana are the magnificent Krishna Balarama Temple and International Guest House, Guruloka School, and Srila Prabhupada Memorial and Museum. There is also a major cultural and educational center in Mumbai. There are beautiful temples in Delhi, Bangalore, Ahmedabad, and Vadodara, besides many other centers throughout India. Srila Prabhupada's most significant contribution, however, is his books. Highly respected by scholars for their authority, depth, and clarity, they are used as textbooks in numerous college courses. His writings have been translated into over 50 languages. The Bhaktivedanta Book Trust, established in 1972 exclusively to publish the works of His Divine Grace, has thus become the world's largest publisher of books in the field of Indian religion and philosophy. In just 12 years, despite his advanced age, Srila Prabhupada circled the globe 14 times on lecture tours that took him to 6 continents. In spite of such a vigorous schedule, Srila Prabhupada continued to write prolifically. His writings constitute a veritable library of Vedic philosophy, religion, literature, and culture.